This is session 8 of stage 2 of Road to Quran Mastery series. This is gonna be the final session about stage 2, in which I answer your questions about the topic to make sure that everything is clear, insha'Allah. So let's get started with the first question. And the first question is from Muhammad Arham. The question is, how should I stop at the end of an ayah if there is tanween or shadda? And this question could be divided into two parts. How can you stop at an ayah that ends with tanween? And the second part, if it ends with shadda. Now, as for the tanween, you're going to deal with tanween exactly the way you deal with all kinds of vowels, which means that if you stop at a word that ends with tanween, you will simply not pronounce the tanween, with exception if the tanween is tanween fatha. Let's look at these examples to understand this even more. In this ayah, we have the word qawm, which ends with tanween dhamm. Now, if you stop at this word, nothing really special is going to happen except that you will not pronounce the tanween dhamm, like that. لَقَالُوا إِنَّمَا سُكِّرَتْ أَبْصَارُنَا بَلْ نَحْنُ قَوْمٌ. And as you've learned in stage 1, this word has mad lean. So this is the only thing you have to pay attention to when stopping at a word like that. And in the next ayah, we have a tanween fatha. And this is the only exception when it comes to stopping at a word ending with tanween. The exception is that when you add tanween fatha, you will also add alif at the end of the word. And if you stop at this word, you will have to pronounce this alif like any other alif that has mad tabi'i, like so. وَلَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا. So I didn't say buruj and then stopped. I said buruja, simply because the word ended with tanween fatha. And as for tanween kasra, also nothing special is going to happen. You will just simply stop at a word without pronouncing the tanween, like so. وَحَفِظْنَاهَا مِن كُلِّ شَيْطَانٍ. So with tanween, you will stop normally like you stop at any other word, with the exception of tanween fatha. You will just need to add alif, and it is also impossible to miss since the alif is written at the end of the word. Now, as for stopping at a word that has shadda, answering this question completely requires an entire lesson about it. But I'm going to try to summarize the most important aspects when you stop at a word that has shadda. As you might know by now is that shadda means doubling the letter. And if you stop at a word that has shadda, you'll have to pronounce this letter clearer to show that this letter ends with shadda. Like so. وَمَا يُضِلُّ بِهِ إِلَّا الْفَاسِقِينَ. So you try harder to show the lam at the end of the word without pronouncing the vowel that is on top of the shadda, because we're stopping at the word. وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ لَفِي شَكٍّ. And here with a letter like kaf, or as we call them, voiceless letters, you'll have to be extra careful when you stop at a word that ends with a letter that is voiceless. So a letter in which you do not use your vocal cords to pronounce it, like ke and te. So you'll have to be keen to show the letter at the end of the word, since it is already voiceless, so it isn't really pronounced that much. And if you stop at a word that has noon, that has shadda on top, you will have to perform the ghunnah if you stop at that word, like so. وَإِن مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا لَيُؤْمِنَنَّ. And finally, I highly recommend watching this video in which I explain the most essential information about stopping in the middle of an ayah. Moving to the next question. Next question is it obligatory to do 2 haraked during ghunnah? And the answer is simply yes. If you're reciting the Quran, you're expected to follow the Tajweed rules. And if you're able to learn the Tajweed rules and you know the rule, then you should apply the ghunnah of two haraked. The next question is, when you read idgham with ghunnah, should we pronounce as irregular letters, waw, ba, mim, noon, with two harakat, or we should pronounce letter with some noise coming out of nose? Now first, ba is not one of the idgham letters. I'm sure you meant ya instead of the ba. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what you mean exactly here by this question. However, if you're pronouncing idgham with the four letters, yanmu, so the ya, noon, mim, and waw, you're supposed to pronounce the letter with ghunnah. So not only the letter, you'll have to add ghunnah, which is the noise coming out of your nose. So it is necessary to add the ghunnah to these letters. The other letters of idgham, which are the ra and the lam, are not included in this case because you can't add ghunnah to the ra and lam. But instead, you will add shadda to the ra and lam if they came after noon sakinah. And for more examples about these cases, I highly recommend going back to days 12 and 13, since I used many examples to clarify this point. Next question. Are ghunnah, iqlab, and ikhfa only limited to two harakat, or even higher than this? First of all, yes, they are limited to two harakat. You are not supposed to do more than that. And if you try and do that, it will be pretty heavy to listen to. And again, if we are talking about how much is two harakat really is, you'll have to go back to the previous Q&A in session 7, because there I answered this question with greater detail. Next question is, during ikhfa, do we need to change the maharaj of noon corresponding to the next harf, like adabun shadid? Here, do we need to do the ghunnah of noon from the maharaj of sheen? Yes, what you explained is exactly what ikhfa is. This is actually what it is. So when after the noon, one of the ikhfa letters comes, then you will pronounce the noon, but only half of the noon, like we learned in the previous lesson. And when I say half of the noon, I mean the ghunnah. And you would shape your mouth anticipating the next letter, but you're still pronouncing half of the noon. And the next letter only starts after pronouncing this noon. So in your example, we say adabun shadid. So after the ghunnah comes the sheen, and that's the proper way to pronounce it. Next question. Do the stopping rules only apply to the Quran or any Arabic words? What rules to apply when stopping on a word with standing kasra, fatha, and dhamma? Yes, since the Quran is written in Arabic, so the rules of Arabic apply to the Quran. And it is a general rule that Arabs never start a word with a sukoon, and they never end a word with a vowel. And that's why when you stop at a word in an ayah, you will have to turn the vowel at the end of the word into sukoon. So you basically do not pronounce the vowel at the end of the word. So if you learn the rules of stopping for the Quran, you can just simply apply the same rules for any Arabic text. Next question. I face difficulty for the shape of the mouth in ghunnah of ikhfa. You already showed mouth position for some letters in your previous video, which makes it easier for me. Is it possible to show the mouth shape for all ikhfa letters? Yes, inshallah, that is no problem. I'll try to give one example for each of the ikhfa letters. عن صلاتهم أأنذرتهم ماء ثجاجا عليا كبيرا إن جاءكم من شر وينقلب من سجيل ولكل درجات من طيبات يومئذ زرقا من فوقهم أن تذبحوا منضود ظلا ظليلا. Next question. Hiding noon and merging noon seem confusing for me. Like in al-insan, you have done ikhfa, and in min salsal, you did idgham. Can you break the confusion between these two? I explained the differences between these two skills in detail in the previous lesson, so I highly recommend going back to day 14 and watching it, since I discussed this matter in detail. And I wouldn't want to repeat myself again in this lesson. The last question is, in my Quran, there is an arrow under the alif in some ayah. Like in Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, there is an arrow under alif saying you should not read with hamzat wasl. So how should I read it? Let's go to the Surah Al-Fatiha from the Urdu Mus'haf. At least in the version that I'm using, I don't see this arrow that you're referring to. But as long as the hamza does not have this sign on top, that means that it is hamzat wasl. So that means that if you keep on reading, you do not pronounce the alif at all. And it should sound like this. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. So as you can see, I did not pronounce hamzat wasl when I was saying ihdina. نستعين اهدنا الصراط. But you should say إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. So this, brothers and sisters, was the last question of today's session. If you have other questions, please wait for the next Q&A session and leave your questions there, or you can always ask your questions in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer your questions, inshallah. Thanks for watching. I hope you've learned something new today. If you did, please like and share the video for other people to learn from it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.